Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming to our session on applying AI and automation for AR and denial management. I'd initially thought it's like an intimate lunch and learn session, but then I saw the profound size of the room, and now I'm worried whether I have enough profound things to say in this room. But I will try my best to educate you on a few things that you can take home as steps, techniques that we have tried and been very successful as we have dealt with a lot of large radiology and imaging groups and other specialties as we have helped them with their AR challenges. So I'm hoping to go through a few things. I'll try for us to kind of discuss what are the issues we have seen. Hopefully you can empathize and understand some of them. Would like to hear some of yours as we get into questions. Talk about what are the challenges and the approaches that we have today, and then I will discuss like a 5-step strategy to kind of solve for it, and I'll walk through each one of them in detail. So you have some sense of how we have approached this problem at Infinx, and what we've seen from very diverse number of customers. Hopefully that gives you enough. Please feel free to kind of have questions. I'm going to leave enough time in the end for us to kind of discuss any individual challenges you have seen that may be different, or challenges that you've seen and maybe solutions that you want to discuss as part of this session. So let's dive right in. What are the challenges we have seen? And we have worked with some of the largest groups in the country as we have dug into their AR. One of the biggest areas we have seen is just kind of lack of understanding of the challenge itself. How big is it? And some of it starts with actually the amount of information that you have is very limited, right? Most of the billing systems provide you a certain amount of transparency, but that transparency is at a very, I would say, very coarse-grained level. It doesn't dive into a lot of the details to understand exactly what's vexing within the problem. And the other problem we see is that because data is not available and it's somewhat reactive, and we kind of look at this kind of in a delayed time fashion, we end up with insights that are reactive. So we're always playing catch up in some shape or form. You won't believe how many times, if I had $1 for every time I heard, oh, I think BCBS is the problem this month, and I think we need to start looking at BCBS claims. Let's kind of get that report together that shows all the outstanding BCBS. Or wait a minute, I think I was a contracting person talking to BCBS next week. Let's figure out all the outstanding bad debt write-off that we have with BCBS for contractual adjustments. I mean, standard, but it's kind of reactive with respect to what we're doing. And what that means is, in most scenarios, you are actually working on intuition. And intuition is built with experience, and a lot of you in the room have a lot of experience. So I'm not saying replace your intuition. Your intuitions are very good. But intuitions also build biases. And those biases are difficult to change unless you see more data. So I'll touch on how that matters in a little while. The other thing which we have seen over the last few years, and hopefully you can empathize with this, it's become a little bit of a game with respect to the reimbursement rules from a payer perspective. There's enough subtle changes that shift the pattern ever so slightly to what gets reimbursed, what doesn't get reimbursed, and what are the rules of reimbursement. Which means something that worked until yesterday just seems to stop working, right? And that becomes another challenge, because now you have an intuition that you had built, whether it was reactive or not, but now that intuition is invalidated because something else is happening, because the payers have changed how they're doing it. But last but not least, and this is one of the biggest challenges we have seen over the last couple of years post-COVID, is just the number of resources, especially skilled resources, who are necessary to do these follow-ups, has continued to increase. What that has meant is that there isn't enough resources, at least with most practices, to touch everything all the time. So there is always this conscious decision that has to be made as to how much are you going to go after. Now, no RCM leader wants to say, I don't want to go after every penny that I am owed. But at some point, you have to make those decisions because you're going to start hitting against appeal and filing limits, and you end up with having to deal with write-offs. So the question is, can we be smarter about this entire life cycle, right? And when we looked at how to solve this, kind of some of the bigger challenges that we saw is you can't really predict how much can be got through each of these processes, right? You don't know whether a certain claim is going to actually recover or not recover. You don't have a good understanding of the actual past historicals unless you've kind of built an intuition or analytics around it. The other is you see that you're actually missing prioritization of claims, because if you have limited number of resources working them, you can't actually prioritize everything. Then what do you prioritize? We see very coarse-grained approaches being taken, high dollars. Sometimes then you go into filing limits and say, oh my God, we've got filing limits issues. Let's look at everything that's going to miss filing. So when you look at these challenges, it becomes kind of it's a catch-up game that you're playing. And if you have a lot of AR outstanding, then the issue is that you have to plan your resources to work a certain number of them. You don't know which ones and how many a resource can do. You have a very high level understanding of productivity and the number of touches that a person can do, but in essence, you don't know exactly how much output they will produce. So you have to kind of start making some top of the Excel sheet kind of analysis and assumptions on what you can actually get through the pipe at any point in time. And last but not least, I think there's a lot of tasks that still are manually intensive, but really are, I would say, repetitive and redundant in some shape or form. You're following up on an AR because you've filed a claim and you're just still looking to figure out, are you going to get any outcome out of it? Or you're checking on the status of eligibility or coordination of benefits because you didn't have the data upfront and the claim got denied. So many of these tasks can actually be resolved through automation, and what we see is that we still don't see a lot of organizations actually having the ability to kind of synchronize all this through automation. Many organizations have started taking early steps and saying, hey, let's get some automation here and try to solve this, but it's not as synchronized and coordinated as we see in many scenarios. So we're going to talk about a 5-step approach to the AR recovery. We're going to start with analyze. How do you look at your AR, understand what is recoverable, and plan against that with respect to your resources. Next step is predict, is to actually really predict how much of the AR is collectible, because today we still work off gross charges. We have some sense of which ones by certain denial types. Oh, it's a denial for prior authorization may not get paid, or it's a denial for medical necessity may have a challenge, but in eligibility we have a better idea. There's intuition around it, but you don't exactly know how much you're going to get paid. So can you predict exactly what you're going to get paid on every charge that is out there? The next is prioritize them, because again, you don't have enough people, so you want to prioritize the work and identify how many people do you need to deploy against the work, and how can you actually maximize your collections out of it. Next is really organize, which is essentially at the point of looking at this data and allocating it to people. You have to make decisions on who gets the work, right? And every person is not equal. Everybody doesn't have exact same set of skills. Today we make very gross assumptions, but some teams are very well organized. They are organized by pair or organized by different functions or processes or type of denials. We believe that that's great, but it still kind of misses more fine-grained organizational work that you could do. And last but not, how do you realize efficiency, whether it's through automation or other sources, right? So let's kind of talk about analyze a little bit in detail. The first thing to remember is all charges are not equal, right? So we kind of look at the overall inventory and say, okay, we have $10 million in outstanding AR. How do we go recover $10 million? And we have 50 people working it or 10 people working it, whatever the mechanism is. But it's important to actually drive down a little deeper in understanding the drivers of the AR. Now, many teams actually do a great job like one level down, analyzing this data, looking at one click down, what is the pair, or what is the CPT, and maybe getting organized. But you have to look at it across multiple dimensions. The other more important thing when it comes to AR actually and denial management is also the notion that you have to mesh what I call financial value against operational value. And what I mean by that is, you may have a claim that you actually is worth $10,000, but it's maybe too early to work it because you have much of filing limit left. And you have a claim that is only $1,000, but you may need to work it tomorrow because you're going to miss filing limits, right? So you have to know that they have to be organized differently for you to work. So analyzing the data is very important. So operational constraints are important. Second thing is, if you already worked it, are you kind of just redundantly touching it? We've seen too many organizations where we work where the conversation ends up being, oh yeah, we are very productive. We're doing a lot of work. We're doing 60 touches a day, 50 touches a day. But the output doesn't measure to the outcome, which is in terms of cash. So the question is, what's going wrong, right? Have we analyzed this at a more deeper level? That's one of the fundamental things that we see. The other thing is you want to be able to look at it across many dimensions. Right? You want to look at the root cause across, is a certain pair causing it? Is a certain procedure or facility that is actually leading to it? And we've seen patterns that actually need to go 2 or 3 levels down to really understand what is outstanding and what is causing these issues. And if you don't identify that and group that very well, it will actually cause issues, because at the end of the day, what will happen is you will end up with a lot of AR being worked, but a lot of cash not coming through the door. So the analysis aspect of the process is a very critical function as you think about kind of the first step, right? And at Infinix, we have actually built tools that actually dive into this at a detail length. We actually do AR health checks that have been very effective. And we've seen some customers have very effective solutions around this. But at the end of the day, you really need to be able to drill into your AR at a much deeper level than looking at it just at the filing, claim, payer, or CPT levels. And in some cases, you may want to be able to look at it across multiple of these dimensions at the same time, right? Does that make sense? The next big thing is really to predict recoverability. This is a more complex challenge, but one that is surmountable, and we've kind of done a lot of work on this. What you have to realize in many cases is the dollar value of the claim itself has no bearing on how much you actually recover on it. I mean, it's your gross charge, you know what the number looks like. In many cases, you have a good sense on possible kind of recovery on some of them based on patterns you've seen, right? Certain claims, oh, you recover all of it. Certain claims, you recover very little of it. So there's always this intuition that is available that says, or certain claims can be recovered more, certain claims can be recovered less. But if that claim that can be recovered less still has a gross number that says $5,000, it makes it very difficult for you not to spend a lot of effort on it because it's got $5,000 on it. So the impact of prediction and impact of AI and machine learning is really that the good thing about machine learning is it can actually learn from data at scale. What that means is it can ingest and consume a lot of data at the same time. Second thing is, because it has no intuition by itself, its learned intuition is based on what outcomes it sees, right? So if you give it a year's worth of data or 2 years worth of data of how you've got paid, it builds a model that essentially comes back and says, okay, I have looked at every outcome of every charge over the last year. And now I've built a mathematical intuition on how each of it is going to get paid. Now that mathematical model is very accurate in many of our customers that we have worked with. It's usually plus or minus $5. And what I mean by that is, we predicted, or the model predicted, that a claim that has a gross of $1,000 is going to get paid $198. I'm just making it up. And we are usually plus or minus $5 with respect to how much that actually got collected when final collections were done, right? Including self-pay and kind of payer responsibility. And why is this important? This is important because now you have a true picture of your AI. You always have what is in the books, but you want to really know what is cash in it. And essentially, a prediction model or AI-based machine learning model can actually help identify that very quickly. Not just at the entire inventory level. It's not just, oh, I've got a 10 million outstanding AR and I think there is like 2 million of cash in it. It can actually do it at a charge level. So when I talk about plus or minus $5, it's an individual charge level, right? And the number of dimensions it considers very broad, 20 to 30 different dimensions it considers. Because you'll be surprised how many different factors actually come into a claim getting paid or not getting paid from a payer perspective. And we've spent quite a bit of time kind of evaluating, understanding, building towards it. And what this does is now it makes it very clear what real outcomes you can achieve, right? Whether that is kind of projections as RCM leaders or CFOs, you know what cash you can actually bring in on a month-to-month basis if you put effort towards it. And it actually sizes the inventory correctly, right? In some shape, you don't have the sizing of the inventory just looking at total gross in some shape or form. And now, what is the point of predicting it, right? The bigger question is, why kind of predict? Of course, you want to know what the underlying bucket is. But more importantly, what you're actually trying to do is prioritize it. And prioritization is a constraint-driven process, right? In many cases, most organizations implicitly prioritize. If you have only 10 people to work it and each of them can only work 50, so you know you can only work 500 charges a day and you have 50,000 outstanding and you're adding 1,000 every month, every day into your backlog pool, you know intuitively you can work out in Excel as to how much you can work. But the number of dimensions you can consider when you actually work out prioritization on an Excel sheet, you can only look at like 2 or 3 things. But prioritization actually has to consider far more dimensions when you think about using that with limited resources. You have to know how many resources are there, what is the outcome that resources can produce. You have to understand what is the productivity throughput that each of them can get through. Is it equal across all payers? Do they vary across different payers? Is it easier to do it for United than doing it for a Blue Cross because hold times are much higher? Is the appeal process more electronic? What is the net kind of touches that is necessary to actually get something through the door? So all of this is essentially very critical to understand a prioritization. So now that you've predicted actual dollars, the dollar value that you've predicted actually can go into as an input into prioritization, right? So now that $5,000 claim that looked like 5,000, which if you did a dollar down prioritization would have been right at the top, once you've reduced it down to actual dollars and the number of touches it takes and how much filing limit is left on it, it may actually only get prioritized a week from now, not today, even though it's a very high dollar number. So you can actually now sort the work to be far more effective because now you know exactly which ones you should work towards. And the way these prioritization algorithms are built, they're kind of linear optimization algorithms that actually have a maximizing function which essentially tries to maximize cache. So the goal is very simple. Given 100 widgets and 5 people to work on it, how should I work the widgets that I have the maximum value that it can generate? Now I'm kind of simplifying that because essentially it's not a correlation between 2 factors, it's 5 or 6 factors that play into it. But now you can actually kind of use all of that to kind of bring it down into something that you can actually take together and prioritize. And in most cases, with many of our customers, we kind of stop here where we've analyzed the outcome, we've looked at what happens with respect to the outstanding inventory, where the gaps are, what the issues are. We have gone through a mechanism of building a prediction model for them where we have actually built a very accurate kind of dollar prediction model on the AR or the outstanding denial, and then we prioritized. Now, once you prioritize, this can be kind of split into like a rank order, and in most cases we kind of split it out into a rank order, 1 through, if you have 1,000 charges, we can prioritize all 1,000 charges 1 to 1,000. And with some customers, we would prioritize them weekly because they want their teams to kind of go heads down, work on a certain number of claims for that week. Some customers, because they want to be more sensitive to the data, want to even prioritize daily, which means you had 30,000 outstanding charges and you prioritized all of them ranked 1 through 30,000. And let's assume your team can only work 3,000 a day because that's all you have the ability to work that day. You would work the top 3,000, but now there are possibilities that you can't work all of them. Some of them are skipped and you may work some of them. The next day, it actually reprioritizes the entire inventory again, adding the new inventory. So you don't take the 3,000 and start working 3,001, 3,002. Now you've got a completely new priority order. And now what happens in that scenario is that it has reconsidered all the factors all over again, which means for the next day it's considered, oh, is another claim that is getting closer to filing limit because of that reason, maybe it needs to be higher in priority in comparison to something else that even has a little more window. Maybe it has a 1-week window. So you essentially end up with the ability to prioritize this at any frequency you want. Somebody would say, oh, I want to just prioritize my inflows are not very complicated. I'm going to prioritize this on a weekly basis. Some customers are going to say, oh, wait a minute, we see this happen all the time, that we are getting inflows at a very high rate. And because we are getting inflows at a very high rate, we would like to prioritize them daily. And we've seen both of the models work. Now, once you prioritize, you have a choice. And the choice is you organize the work the way you organize work within your billing system and do the work. And what we've seen with most of the billing systems that we've worked with is the billing systems are great kind of books of record. They allow for you to interface with your clearinghouse, get the claim through the door, get the ERAs come through. But when it comes to actually organizing work intelligently, they struggle. They have some work queue capabilities, but that we found that to have some limitations. So there is a choice whether you organize this within your billing system or whether you organize it outside. But let's assume you organize it outside, what would you want to focus on? If you're organizing work, the big thing is to understand what can you get from maximum throughput perspective. And I kind of think about throughput as monitoring outcomes, not outputs. And we would have this challenge ourselves all the time where we would see very high throughput in terms of productivity. Or when we went back to our RCM managers and said, hey, we are not seeing the throughput, we were expecting 50, you are doing 37, get it to 50 and we'll solve this problem. And in many cases, we would get it to 50, but we're not seeing the cash come in as we'd expected. So we've started relooking at the metrics of work as kind of revenue per FTE rather than actually productivity per FTE. Right? What is the outcome generated by the work? Now that we are smarter about the work itself, because we know which claims are going to generate value, we know how many touches the claim needs to actually generate dollars, and we know how to prioritize them so that we don't miss them through the pipe. The next thing is to say, hey, let's become smarter about how we allocate them so people really can actually work to produce the most dollars for it, right? Instead of saying, hey, we did the most touches associated to it. And when we do this, we've seen actual dollar throughputs go up by 20%, right? So it's not, the productivity actually in some cases was lower, in the sense, if you just counted number of widgets touched, the number of widgets touched went down, but the actual dollar generated per FTE went up. Because in whether you like it or not, most people are, as Charlie Munger said, show me an incentive and I'll show you the behavior. People are incentivized and their behavior matches their incentive. So if we say you have to work 50, most folks figure out how to work 50. And what we see when they work 50 is it may not be the most productive 50. But if you said, hey, produce $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000 in outcomes versus producing 50 or 60, the behavior changes. Now the person is incentivized to work that claim that actually is going to yield dollars, but is going to take a little more work because he doesn't have to worry about keeping the clicker on. That actually changed the approach in many scenarios with respect to how dollars. So when we think about organize and allocate work, we found that we could organize work based on outcomes rather than outputs to begin with. The second that was interesting in many scenarios is that sometimes when we organize and allocate work, assumption is made that work is equal and hence people are equal. And in many scenarios, work is not equal. You know that very well. People are not equal. But then how do you know who is good at what? In many cases, again, it's based on kind of knowledge, their supervisors being very clear, okay, this person is really good at doing this kind of an appeal or this kind of a denial, or this person actually works very well with certain payers and has very high success rates. The question is, can you actually take that data and analyze it in a fashion that allows you better intelligence on the people that are working? And then now, can you use automated allocation mechanisms to actually allocate work to those people when the work needs to be allocated? The third thing is, can you make sure that the work is allocated in a fashion where they don't have the ability to cherry pick the work that they want to do because they have to meet some productivity criteria? Fourth is, if you measure on total collections per FTE or revenue generated per FTE, and then incentivize on that, then now you've actually kind of changed the game with respect to how you organize and allocate work. And we've seen making the shift from one extreme to the other has had significant financial impacts. Right? As I said, 20% plus throughputs, but just combining with the prioritization, we've seen cash in hand increase by 20 to 30%. Right? And again, it depends on how good your practice is. You may already be very efficient, you may already be touching everything, then it diminishes how much the tech can help you with it. But if you are struggling with some of these areas, we've seen some tremendous results out of this. The last thing I'll say very quickly about the organize, allocate aspect of work is also the fact that we still don't see most billing systems or affiliated or ancillary components to be able to incorporate automation into the workflow seamlessly, which means even if you bought in an automation solution, in many cases the automation solution sits outside, you're trying to generate a batch file, trying to send the batch file over, get the results, somehow put that back in the billing system, and work is not seamless, right? So if I really was working on a claim and I've touched it and all I needed to follow up and it's in my queue, two things can happen, right? One is I can kind of do the clicker and say, hey, I did work today because I followed up. And how did I follow up? I followed up on the web and status is not changed. But it seemed like I did work. Versus if you could kind of seamlessly associate it to the person, he does the appeal or the filing associated to it and doesn't have to think about it. Now there is a automation that does the follow-up. As soon as if the follow-up is not done in a timely fashion, it can come back and reassign it to the person. But if it's done, it's taken off the queue. The person doesn't see it. So that's the other piece as we've kind of looked around with our customers as to what we could improve is improve how we can kind of make the man-machine orchestration more seamless within the workflow. That's the other thing that the organize, allocate kind of aspect of work really kind of comes into play with. And we touched on this a little bit. How do you realize this efficiency with automation, right? And now, in many cases, some use cases are very apparent. You can look at them and say, yeah, this is easy to automate, or this is a standard thing to automate. But ideally, you want to do process and operating procedure mappings. And you have most of your process owners who work through this. And what we've realized is that some processes may have higher degree of automation that you can do and others not. But every process has some opportunity to do automation. So if you can do the process mapping and identify where these automation opportunities exist, then it makes it easier for you to actually implement these automations. And if you can seamlessly integrate into the workflow, then you can realize the value. Because otherwise what happens is, as I said earlier, if it's a disconnected process, then you do not realize the value because you're doing something that seems like it should add value, but it's sometimes maybe adding more work to you. So you actually want to work through a mechanism that helps you realize this efficiency by doing, I would say, process mapping around it. And most of the times we've seen pair-related tasks or tasks that are redundant where you're just moving data between systems or submitting information. They are low value but equally important tasks, and they're ripe for automation. In most cases with our customers, when you want to go to Availity and check eligibility, or you want to check the claim status on United, you can make it automated. And there is enough technology. We've built our own automation platforms that allow to just kind of do some of these tasks. You work with a process owner, you map out the process, you work through it, and you have the ability to automate that, right? So there is a lot that you can actually do with automation that you actually now reduce the effort and have your human effort focused very much on value-added tasks. And then you change the metric to be focused on outcomes rather than outputs. Now the person has an incentive not to focus on redundant tasks because he doesn't get paid by the click. So he is focused on the outcome activity, which may be a little more complex, but it's where the human value add is. And the other thing is, one of the things from our perspective as we built our platform was, hey, how do you kind of seamlessly interoperate with the billing system? So work eventually has to get back because that's the book of records. So what we've done is spend time understanding how do we get data off the billing system, do these 5 steps, allow for an organization and allocation of work for a team to work on AR. So they get a view of the data that's in the billing system within the system, so they can go off, do their payer follow-ups, their appeals, and then get the outcome back into the billing system. And if you can do that, then essentially at that point in time, you have the ability to coexist with the billing system without actually now having to do double data entry or folks having to do work in two different systems. That will also help you realize efficiency. So I'll just kind of summarize it. As you think about the life cycle, we believe that there is a ton of opportunity if you think about your outstanding AR, and it will vary by practice, vary by groups. Some of you may have higher degree of needs and some of you may not. And we usually do like a health check to actually identify the degree of need. And if you look at all your core metrics, you know whether as you trend your core metrics, whether it's days in AR or AR over 120 or AR over 90, you know where your trend is looking like. So depending on the trend, you have the ability to do these 5 steps. And we actually, from a platform perspective, do all the 5 steps. But from an implementation perspective, each one of you can look at any one of these steps and start with it. Whether that is better analysis or better prioritization or some automation, you have the ability to do that. But we believe that doing all of them in synchronization actually produces the most outcome. And hopefully it gave you some tips and tricks with respect to how we have approached AR, kind of denial management from a solution and a platform perspective based on our customers. But I want to take the time to open up to the group here. Please feel free to ask any questions, either of the approach or anything that happens within your practice that you think is important to share with the group here. Anything that you would like to hear or understand more about any of these techniques, I'm happy to do that. I'm here, I'm at the Infinx booth. Please feel free to stop by, ask me questions, and happy to dig into any specific topics that you may want to raise. But otherwise, I thank you for the time you gave me. Appreciate you spending the valuable hour with me understanding some of these things. Thank you.